all for coming. We're going to try to get started right on time. My name is Tarina Morris. In this capacity, I serve as the Deputy Superintendent for the Marin County Office of Education. I have another gig down in South County. I also serve as the Interim Superintendent for the Sausalito Marin City School District. But tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce a couple of colleagues who work across the state, and I will tell you a little bit more about them in just a bit, but just to get oriented, when we were getting a couple of calls, some inquiries from some community members, the question went like this. People in the community outside of the education world really don't understand what charter schools are, and we're reading a lot about them in the paper. What kind of impact do they have on school districts? Are they public schools? Are they not public schools? How are they funded? How do they interface with our traditional schools? Who sends their kids? How do you get into charter schools? Just sort of the basics, you know, when we find ourselves in public education, oftentimes forgetting that, you know, the majority of the public don't live in our world, and they don't share our language and our common understanding about what it is about schools and charter schools in particular. So when we talked about, well, maybe in the request was, can you do some sort of informational evening to help the public better understand, and knowing that we can hold an evening meeting, people may come, they may not, but we're going to post this recording tonight on our website and make it available for anybody who might want to watch it. We are also, one of the things we talked about was what was the format that we wanted to use tonight. We talked about having a panel of experts and inviting the Charter Schools Association, the Fiscal Crisis Management and Assistance Team, School Services of California, and we thought, well, that would be great if we could get a panel. Well, logistics just didn't fall together for us, so we weren't able to do this soon enough and pull a panel together. So we thought, well, maybe that's something in the future, that we would do a panel. But for tonight, this is what we thought would be a nice approach to do Charter Schools 101, and to invite some of our colleagues that have a lot of experiences across all different types of schools across the state, both traditional and public charter schools. And so if you have questions during or after the presentation tonight, there are these cards that are on your table. Please feel free to write your questions down. Tonight's format is not going to allow for a Q&A at the end, but whatever questions you submit, we will ask our experts to provide a response, and we will post those to the website along with the recording. So with that, I'm first going to introduce on my far left, Brianna Garcia is with School Services of California. She is the Director of Management Consulting Services. She has worked with school districts to strengthen their organizations by conducting organizational reviews, comparative analysis of school district resources and staffing, facility reviews, and charter petition reviews. She's provided guidance to school districts as they work through the local control and accountability plan process, and also has extensive experience related to planning and development of public school facilities, including charter schools and Proposition 39. She has more than a decade of professional experience in public K-12 education and has worked as Facilities Development Manager for the Los Angeles Unified School District. And so, to my immediate left is Michelle Giacomini. She's originally from Marin County, by the way. Actually, I shouldn't say that. She's always been originally from Sonoma County, but she worked in Marin County.
I was born in Marin County.
Oh, you were? Oh, didn't know that. Okay. So Michelle works for the state's Fiscal Crisis Management and Assistance Team, FCMAT, as the Deputy Executive Officer. FCMAT provides fiscal advice, management assistance, professional development, and other related school business services to assist local educational agencies fulfill their financial and management responsibilities. Michelle has 22 years of experience working in accounting and auditing in private and educational industries, She regularly presents in many state and LEA settings and currently serves as an instructor for the University of Southern California School Business Management Certificate Program, as well as the CASBO CBO Partner Training Program. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to my esteemed colleagues.
Thank you. Everyone looks so serious out there. How are you tonight? Okay, so how many of you feel like you're familiar with charter schools? It's good. So you may even know more than me. See, so there you go. I know that when I started in school business years and years ago, I should have known more than I did. I worked at Marin County Office of Ed, believe it or not, many years ago. And then Nevada Unified School District that had one charter school at that time, and I think they have more now, but it was a dependent charter school, which really isn't in law, if anybody really knows charter schools. Dependent charter schools are not really a real thing. Independent charter schools are not a real thing. They're really either convergent or startup. But from an oversight perspective, when I started in Nevada and we needed to oversee our charter school, I knew nothing. I mean, I thought I did, but I didn't understand why charter schools were here, where they came from, why did students go to them, why did parents want that? I didn't understand. So years later, now that I like to think I'm a little smarter and started my life over a few times, I realized what charter schools are all about. My husband and I, between us, have 6 children, and they're all boys, believe it or not. And that's a whole story in itself, even the dog is a boy. But our kids, I learned as they got older, did not have all of the same educational paths at all. They all learned a little differently, and we live in Petaluma, and not necessarily were all the choices there for them. That's the difference, and that's why charter schools started. Traditional schools in the early 1992 actually, people came forward and talked about, and the law was passed about charter schools, because it was a choice for families and students. And that's really how the charter school law, in my opinion, came about. It's about choices and how we educate students, and so that all students can learn. In the beginning, there were 100, it was capped at 100 charter schools. And you're gonna see as we start going through the slides, there are more charter schools now than traditional public schools. They're all public schools, so let's understand what there's just the difference of traditional and charter schools. There are close to 1,300 charter schools, but there are less than 1,000 school districts. Now that doesn't mean there are as many students in charter schools as traditional public schools at all, but they're all public school students, and it's about choices. So I think that's really important. What Brianna and I want to do tonight is just really go through the basics of the law, what we believe is really important in everybody getting along with charter schools. We do not have a political agenda. We have gotten some phone calls asking what our agenda is. It's absolutely nothing, and I'll be honest. We both work statewide. We work in charter schools, community college, school districts, and county offices. That is our job day in and day out. And so we see things from a lot of different ways in our jobs. We see the good and we see the bad in all of those entities. But tonight is truly about charter schools, where they started, how a petition happens, what good oversight should look like, how the facility rules work, how the funding works. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. It really is meant to be basic. So if you thought it was going to be more than that or more exciting, I have to apologize up front. This really is a basics thing, and I try to be funny once in a while, but it doesn't always work. So this is what we're going to talk about from a lot of different subjects, like I just went through. And I think if I can get nothing else across, because I see this, and Brianna does too as we go across the state, we all need to work together. This is one public education system, and I think a lot of times our personal feelings get in the way of, I am an old Marin County family. I'm from Point Reyes. I love one-room schoolrooms, and I hate when things go away. I hate when things change, and that's what happens a lot when a petition comes forward to a school district, and we get emotional about it because it's going to be different. But what we're not thinking about is that we really need to work together, because this is really about students. And charter schools weren't formed to take funding away from school districts, although it might feel like it. Charter schools really are about giving more choices to families. So that would be, keep that in mind, it's really important. Communication is critical. So communication when it comes to charters and their authorizers, from the minute, even before a petition is brought forward, we really need to be talking to our community. We need to be smart through the petition process, the review process, the oversight process. We all need to work together. And I feel like I'm preaching, and I probably am, but that's again because I'm the mother of too many children. But I see so often where charters and their oversight agencies don't get along, and that's really sad for everybody's sake, right? Because in the end, we're all trying to serve the same students. But these are things I think that we can do about working together, be collaborative, understand the process, and communicate if we can. So charter schools really are about serving all students. I mean, all students do learn differently. But some facts about charter schools, they are public schools, and that's really important. Sometimes the question will come to me, is it a charter school or a public school? Well, they're all public schools. They really are. They actually get funded the same. I mean, there's some anomalies in the funding, but comes from the same base as a traditional public school. So we're all funded the same, public schools. The one thing that people get confused about is who can authorize a charter school. That can be a school district, a county office, or the State Board of Education. And it doesn't mean that a county office always authorizes a charter school just because the petition got denied at the school district level. So that's important. Some petitions go right to a county office or right to the State Board of Education. Often though, yes, a county office or the state board does authorize a charter because the charter has been denied at the local level and it moves through the process. And we do have some slides on that. But the law allows all three of those actually to be authorizers. So any of those three, district, county office, or state board of education, which would be through the Department of Ed, have authorizer capacity if in fact they do approve a petition. The authorization piece is really important, and we'll talk about some slides on that, as are MOUs, which are agreements between the charter and the authorizer. An agreement, so up front, we're talking about how we're going to get along, how we're going to do things, what's expected of us. FCMAT and school services would always say a best practice is to have an MOU with your charter right from the beginning, so we can all be on the same page. It's supposed to be a communication document. Does it always work out that way? Not so much, right? Sometimes we still argue after the fact, but that is the intent of it. We're going to talk about the Charter Schools Act. Like I said, it first came about in 1992. It keeps going, right? Initial charter petitions can be originally can be asked for up to 5 years, and the renewals are for another 5 years. So think about that. That is one big difference between a traditional public school and a charter public school, right? Traditional schools, they don't have a 5-year renewal. We know they're going to be around unless they run out of money, bless you. And that's a whole other story and another hat that I wear if school districts run out of money. Charter schools actually need to bring a petition forward for renewal every 5 years. So they really have a 5-year life before they need to come forward with another renewal. And of course, they could bring it early, but it's this process. It's really a hard thing for students and their families in the charter school because they do have to continuously ask for renewal, right? So a family doesn't always know if that charter is going to continue. If that charter is doing a good job, though, they should be continuing, right? They will be renewed. If they are fulfilling the terms of their charter and they're financially solvent and they're fulfilling all the rules that everyone agree on, they will keep going. So, but that is a real big difference between traditional and charter schools, the 5-year renewal versus basically forever. Oh, okay, just turned it off. I'm not the technology queen. I have to turn it on. So, Charter Schools Act 1992. There's the Ed Code section if you wanted it for some reason. But basically, the intent of the legislature was to, with the Charter Schools Act, was to do a couple things. Was to find ways and to allow for the collaborative thinking to improve pupil learning, to increase the learning opportunity. So hoping and wanting charter schools to be a little more innovative than districts are in some things. I like to think of charter schools as competition for school districts. Often charter schools come about because school districts aren't offering something that the families or the students want or feel that they need. And so often that's where a charter petition will come in. I believe that the charter law should have kind of told districts it's time to be a little more competitive with your offerings, right? We all have a certain amount of money. It's based on per pupil spending amount. Let's figure out how we can offer the most to our community. And so that's what charters do often, and it's a school district that's had to cut a lot of programs or made decisions to cut a lot of programs or a certain flow of learning. A charter school will come in with a petition with a dedicated way of thinking and teaching that the district isn't able to offer, and that's attractive to parents. So it is competition to school districts, and that's where that innovative piece comes in. Also, a part of the charter law was about professional development and learning for teachers. So you'll often see in charter schools they're a little more innovative with their professional development and their offering to their staff than we have been in traditional public schools. And so that was part of the attraction as well. And so and there's different rules on, not all the same ed code provisions have to be followed and all of that, but there's still a ton of laws that charter schools have to follow. And so we're going to get to that. Charter schools still have to follow certain laws. So not only does the charter school itself, part of their law is their charter school petition, which we're going to talk about the elements that have to be in a petition, an MOU, if it's agreed on, a memorandum of understanding, bless you, between the charter school and the authorizer. And then there's other laws that the charter school has to apply, has to go along with as well. It's not like the charter school is the wild, wild west, right? And that seems to be the understanding of a lot of people as well. So there are rules, there are laws that they're complying with, all of the federal laws. And remember, if charter schools want certain funding, and they do, just like traditional public schools, they're going to follow certain laws too. That's part of it. Nothing is free. So that's good. So don't think that if a charter school comes in, there are no rules at all. So on the screen are the different things that charter schools have to follow, just like traditional public schools. And I think this one is really important from the authorizer side. If a school district or a county office, or the State Board of Education, but I can't talk for them, were to approve a charter school for their liability piece to be minimized, they have to provide good oversight. And you're going to see later in our slides, it's not that good oversight is necessarily defined really, really well in the law, in my opinion. And so, we do have suggestions for that, because actually to me what's in the law isn't very much of what an authorizer has to do. But I always want to reinforce the importance of good authorization. So once we take a charter on, and whether it was our choice or not, because sometimes good charter petitions come to us and we don't necessarily want the charter in our district, but there's no way we can deny it. So we're going to show you the slides on reasons you can deny a charter. We need to take that on wholeheartedly, provide good authorization and good partnership, because that charter's there, and there are students. So that's where it gets hard, and we have to make sure that remember that there is a liability provision if it is a nonprofit, or if the charter is a nonprofit and we're not providing good oversight, we could be held liable at the end of the story if something were to happen to that charter school. So that's very, very critical. So when it comes to petitions, the goal of the legislature was that we approve charter petitions unless there's really a factual reason not to. And that's important. We can't deny if a petition comes to us just because we don't like the idea, or it might take ADA away, or we just don't think we have the capacity to do it. There has to be a factual reason in the petition and something that's actually spelled out in law why we deny it, or it's unsound financially. There has to be a real reason. The numbers don't make sense, the enrollment doesn't make sense, not just because we don't want to do it. And so that seems to be a misnomer out there. There are a lot of school districts or potential authorizers that's never had a petition come to them. And they assume that it's not going to happen because they're not charter friendly. Not that simple. If somebody writes a really good petition and the program makes sense and the budget makes sense and it all flows well, there may not be a reason to deny that. And so it's good to remember that it's not something that we just choose if we're going to be able to do it or not. Because if the petition is correct and follows the law, we may not have a choice. So that was the intent back in 1992, and is still the intent today with charter schools. And that's why it comes down to choice for students. Okay. Do you want to add anything, or I'm rolling along? You're good. I like to talk, so it's fine. Okay, so petitions. Let's talk about petitions. So the charter petition, what we're talking about here is really that initial petition when a group of people get together and decide they're going to write a petition and bring it to a school district or a county office for authorization. So we have, this great idea for something, a way to educate students, some great programs. We have it all together, and a lot of time we're spent on petitions before they're brought forward. Well, I can't say that's always true. Yet I see the good and the bad. But it's pretty amazing. I mean, I'm not a curriculum person. I'm a bean counter by nature, so I'm more on the finance side. But petitions are pretty amazing. I've also seen some bad petitions, I'll admit it, like the cut and paste where it went to one district and it didn't work, so then the name was just cut and pasted and it's sent to another district. So it happens. I mean, it does. But most that I've seen are really, really good. There are certain rules and things that we need to be ready for when a petition comes. And the first thing I would always tell districts is be ready. You need to talk about charters before they come to your district. It's not something that if you've never talked as a district or as a board and talked about board policy and how we're going to handle it and who's going to review it, it's not a conversation you've had before, that is a mistake. It really is a mistake. You have to know beforehand how you're going to handle it as a district as far as who's going to do the review, what are our criteria. Do we have a board policy in place? Have we already talked about if we're going to want an MOU with the charter school? All of those are conversations before the petition comes. Because as you're going to see, there's on the slide, there are certain clocks that start ticking the minute the petition comes. And it's too late then to make all those decisions of who's going to review it, how we're going to review it. So very critical. So you have to know legally that the minute the petition comes, the clock starts ticking. And that's why those conversations have to happen before. You have to have a public hearing within 30 days of receipt. You'll see that on the slide. And then you have to review it. And there's rules 60 or 90 days after that is when you're going to either grant or deny the petition. That's not a lot of time. And that's why you really have to be prepared of who's going to review the petition, what portions, who's going to be on that team. And so I really, really want to reinforce that if you're from a district or you're from a charter, that piece is important. All that preparation on either side, writing the petition on the charter side and on the authorizer side, being prepared for the petition to come in. But so there's a process that it'll go through. If it's denied, then it would go to the county office, and then there's a step with the Board of Education after that. So that's the approval process. Once approved, assuming that the district does approve the charter school, legally the petition is sound and there's no factual reasons to deny it, then there's an authorization piece, and there are responsibilities that go along with that with the authorizer, just as there is with the charter. So the relationship begins, and that's kind of an interesting thing, right? Because if a district wasn't prepared or wanted the charter in the first place, and the petition ends up being approved, it's now one of your schools. It's a separate legal entity, and that is for sure, it is a separate legal entity, but it's also one of your schools. It's serving the students of your district, and maybe students from other districts, but it's in your boundaries. So once it's there, and you are going to have to provide oversight, which is a relationship. So we all have to get along somehow. Even if we have to provide facilities, which is Prop 39, and Brianna will cover that later, you still have to get along even if you didn't want to do that. So that's the hard part, I think, of the charter world that was put upon us, because charters are brought by a petition. We may not always be positive about the petition coming, but then if it is approved, because the law says we're going to, we need to get along. Because if we don't, it gets pretty bad. And I've seen that many times. So that's how the process looks, or should look, with petitions. So-
It's an MOU.
memorandum of understanding. So and so there will be some slides on that too, but that's like a contract between the charter and the authorizer of what kind of reports, how services will happen. It's a contract that goes along with the petition. So I would always suggest to be ready for petitions to come in as a district, whether you have a checklist or you talked about a committee, who's going to be on the committee, who's going to do what. But preparation is important from the authorization or from the authorizer side, really, really important. Plus, you need to be consistent. Plus, you need to know what the law is and follow the law as you're going through that review. There are signature requirements, and they're on the screen, of how many people have to actually sign that initial petition, whether it's a startup school, which, as I said earlier, is what you often hear for independent charters, although that word isn't in the law, and then conversion schools, which are often dependent charter schools. But when you hear those terms, that's probably what they're referring to when people say it. So the signature rules are on the screen right now. And so that is part of the approval process of a petition, is making sure the required signatures are there. So that's a critical piece. And I would lie if I said that I've never seen pretend signatures on petitions. So, those signatures need to be real. And that's part of the approval process. Again, I see the good and the bad. So these are the timelines I was talking about, from receipt of the petition all the way through approval. You can see, for instance, on the district piece, it's a 30 days from receipt of that petition till the public hearing needs to happen. And it's 60 days from the receipt, or it can be extended to 90 days for the actual decision of the governing board. So that's important. Countywide, so county charters are a little different if the petition goes right to the county office first. And so you can see those days there. It's still, it's instead of 30, it's 60. Instead of 60, it's 90 for those timelines. But those are in law, and the extension of 30 days can happen for the final decision on either, and that is in law. Okay. So when we talk about petitions, we always talk about the elements that petition has to have in it. And these are in law. So all of these areas that you see on the screen, all 15, must be part of the petition. So if you look at different petitions, you'll see that they really look the same formatting-wise, that they all contain these specific areas. And that itself is not a cut and paste job, that's the law. That every petition has to have these areas covered in the petition, and a description of how the charter school is going to fulfill these elements. So that's the really specific part to that charter school that's come forward to your district or county office. So this is the specific part. So all of these areas have to be covered. If one of these areas is not covered, then that is a reason for denial. So that's important. So again, when you see similarities between petitions of these areas, that's why it has to be in there. And then in addition to the elements, on the screen right now are the additional things that really need to be covered well in the petition. And you'll see the signatures that I talked about, there has to be the required number of signatures, has to have all of these different elements that I've talked about. Things that we all know that you can't, pupil attendance has to be voluntary. There's things that have to be contained, these elements, that's why we say it's 15 plus, that also have to be in the petition. So whoever is reviewing that petition is making sure, in addition to the elements, that these other factors are there, these other pieces are interwoven within the petition itself. So this is all very, very important. In addition, the petition has to talk about where the charter school is going to reside. So there are laws about where the charter school has to be if it's gone to a certain authorizer for approval. It has to reside within the geographic boundary of who they're going to ask to be authorized by. So that piece is in law. Kate just spilled her tea, I think. I'm sorry. There can be multiple locations. Sometimes a charter isn't able to find facilities within the geographic boundary of who they've gone to ask to be authorized by. But to go to another district, they would have to ask for permission. It's not like we can just, if we bring a petition forward, we can go anywhere. We really need to be within the geographic boundaries unless we have further conversation. All of that has to be spelled out in the petition. as well as now with LCAP, which is something, much newer in the last 3 to 5 years, that also has to be spelled out. The annual goals have to be spelled out in that petition as well. And so as part of that approval, and we're also looking at the language to make sure that the educational program, what's going on with the physical safety of the students, all of those things per the Ed Code are all things that we're looking at throughout the petition. And if any of the things I just talked about really quickly aren't in there, those are grounds for denial. So that's what I'm saying. It has to be a factual reason of all these different things I talked about that need to be contained. It's not easy for a group of people to put a petition together and come forward. It's a lot of words and it's a lot of information, but it does need to make sense, right? What I've seen a lot with people who bring petitions forward is there's a lot of passion for how we want to instruct students differently, offer different programs, but we're going to talk about the finance side in a minute, but the numbers just don't make sense. That has to make sense too. And so a lot of the people I know that talk about education needs to be different and we want to put a charter school together and they have so much passion, but they have to understand the business side as well. Because in addition to all these things we want to offer students, the finances have to make sense. The enrollment has to make sense. We have to do a good job with forecasting and projecting all of that. So that's all part of this process as well. Also part that we have to make sure is that whatever is outlined in that petition is likely to really happen. It can't be pie in the sky. So whatever is in the petition as far as this educational program that we want to offer students, does it make sense? Is it doable? I mean, we have to think about that and talk about that as we go through the petition process. If anything seems unrealistic, we need to investigate that further and talk about it further. And there's nothing wrong with talking about it further. Having interviews with the petitioners, trying to understand all of that more. Very, very important. Again, it's all about communication. So that's really, really critical. The financial piece, because I'm from FCMAT, right, is so very critical. So I can't reinforce that enough. We can have the best curriculum educational plan in the world, and it's really what we want to do. We think it's best for kids, but it does have to pencil out. And administratively, this entity that's coming forward for approval needs to make sense. So it really is the whole picture. It's the whole thing. So the California Code of Regulations does talk about minimum pieces that need to be discussed in that petition. How is payroll going to happen? How is accounting going to happen? Does it all make sense, right? Do the numbers make sense? Does the plan make sense? And so if I were a group of parents that had a great idea for a charter school, I would want to make sure there were curriculum experts on that petition team, as well as finance experts, as well as people that understand budget, because it takes all of that. And so that's what I'm trying to get across for the petitioner side. For the authorizer side, it takes the same experts to really review that petition and does it make sense? Because we both want to protect ourselves. None of us want to approve a charter that isn't going to be successful. And if a charter petition does come forward that really could be successful and good for kids, what a great partnership to have with another group, with a charter, that yes, may take some enrollment away from our district, but you know what? Those kids haven't been served very well. So it really can be a good partnership and discussion if it's good for kids. So on the next couple slides are different financial requirements, things to think about as you're reviewing the petition or as you're putting the petition together, things that should be considered in that process. And I do mean that. It's not just reviewing the petition. It's if you're on the other side of it and you're this size of the beginning when a petition is brought forward, that's what it feels like. These are the pieces that need to be included as well. You want to make sure it's a complete picture. I can talk hours about budget and multi-year projections and cash flows. I won't do it, but all of this is just as important because when a charter school starts up, that's when it's usually most expensive when we're not getting revenue from the state, right? So there has to be a really good plan of where the money is coming from, what do we think enrollment is going to be, how fast are we going to grow our charter school, where's the charter school going to be? All of that has to be taken into consideration and make sense. And again, it just needs to make sense. That's the critical part. So in that petition, there's the finance side, and then there's all the other stuff, right? There's human resources, there's curriculum, there's legal, there's all kinds of different reviews that should be happening. Just as when the petition was put together, I would hope that, experts from all those sides would be involved in that process. Same thing again should happen with that review. Make sure the right people are looking at it from both sides of the puzzle. Very, very important. So we want the petition to make sense, and we want it to be successful at the charter school. So, let's assume that the petition had all the required elements. There was nothing factually of why we could deny it. So we've approved the charter school. And now, from the authorizer standpoint, I have a responsibility to provide oversight to that charter school. And that is in law. And so again, it's a relationship, but I do need to make sure that I'm also providing the pieces that I'm supposed to provide. So the charter has a responsibility to educate students, stay financially sound, and responsibilities to the authorizer, and the authorizer has responsibilities as well. I like to think, although a lot of charter schools don't like to think of it this way, and I apologize, but I think the system works well with school districts and county offices with AB 1200. Has anybody heard of AB 1200? And it has to do with fiscal oversight. And, county offices work with their school districts. Again, I work for FCMAT, so I'm biased. I think Fiona might agree with this too. But it has to do with relationships. And so county offices work with their school districts as a second eye to make sure that it makes sense, the numbers make sense, and will they be solvent in the current and 2 subsequent years. When they close the books, the numbers make sense. That's in code that county offices and school districts work this way. It's in code. You can go into the details if you wanted. But AB 1200 doesn't apply to charter schools and their authorizers. So really that oversight responsibility between an authorizer and a charter school, there are some pieces that are defined in law, and I'll show you that. But when it comes to the finance piece, I do like to think of it as that relationship between school districts and county offices. And so that's an important thing to point out from the beginning. As the authorizer, these are the reports I'm going to expect from my charter school. These are the reports, these are the projections I'm going to need to see. This is the cash flow, but actually saying that up front. Because where it's in law between school districts and charter schools, not necessarily as specific about charter schools and authorizers, but it is a relationship that works, in my opinion, because we've not had as many fiscal insolvencies as I think we might have had otherwise through the last 20 years. We've only had 10, believe it or not, and that's pretty good if you think about all the economic uncertainty that we've had the last many years. I think charter schools, if there was a better oversight piece between the authorizer and the charter, things might go a little better there too. But the authorizer is responsible for many pieces of that. While the petition is required by law, the petition that we just went through and ended up approving in this scenario, an MOU is not required by law. The MOU is what would really discuss all these pieces of oversight, what it's going to look like. And that's the discussion between the two entities, not just arrangements of how facilities are going to be paid for and what amount, maintenance, all the different pieces, who's going to pay what, but also oversight, what it's going to look like. How often are we going to meet? What reports are we going to look at? These are the types of things that can be in the MOU, which is also a contract. Will go along with the petition. That kind of fully explains the whole relationship much better and gives less room for problems later on. So, Ed Code 47604 at point 32, if you wanted to be technical, is what talks about oversight in the Ed Code. And it tells us the things we have to look at, but again, it doesn't tell us how. And so that's the piece that the MOU would help us with. On the authorizer, on the screen right now are the things that oversight has to include. So by law, oversight, you have to designate at least one staff member who's going to be the contact person with the charter school. That's in the law. That's pretty simple, right? That for oversight, that's pretty easy. The authorizer has to visit each charter school at least annually. That's part of the law of oversight. And so I would always suggest, so that both sides understand, it can be more than once a year, but it has to be at least once a year. And it's good for that site visit to kind of talk about what are the things we're going to want to look at and talk about when we come visit. It doesn't have to be a secret, right? When the authorizer goes out to the charter school, we can talk about what we're going to expect and what we'd like to see when we come out. It's about relationships. The authorizer has to make sure that the charter school is complying with all the required reports. And so that's an important piece, and so those are the budgets that are required by law. That's the LCAP, that's different things that we're going to have on the next screen, but that's critical. Also in law, it says that the authorizer is going to monitor the fiscal condition of the charter school. And so how that's done, and with what reports that is done, isn't defined in the law. I mean, this is what the law says. So again, the importance of the MOU and spelling that out. And then also in the law about oversight is that the authorizer has to actually notify the Department of Ed if certain things happen with the charter school, if it's renewed, if it's denied, if it's revoked. So there's certain notification procedures, which makes sense, right? Because there's a lot of student records and different things that have to be transferred if a charter doesn't go on. So it's the communication piece with the Department of Ed. So when it comes to financial reports, what's on the screen right now are at a minimum what the charter schools have to actually fill out and what the authorizer should be getting a copy of or reviewing, right? So that's really critical. There may be other reports that the authorizer requests of the charter school, and again, if that's in the MOU, that would be best. That's understood up front. I know best practice would be that you really want to see financial reports monthly from the charter school. Now, it doesn't do any good to receive or ask for reports if you're not going to really look at them. So I do know many authorizers that ask for certain reports and they kind of go in a folder. Doesn't do any good because if the authorizer has certain rules about what they want to look at and what they're requesting of the charter school, I would always suggest to the authorizer, if you're not going to really look at it and do anything with it, it's not doing any good. Because the charter could be sending you real information and things aren't going very well. You're not looking at it, you're not monitoring it. Remember that liability slide that I talked about? That's not very smart. So you need to help your charters look at the reports, look at the things that you're asking for. Because if there is a problem brewing, and let's say the charter school has lost their financial person and someone from the oversight piece is actually noticing something, that should be a conversation. It's not a secret, we need to be looking at all of this. So these deadlines that are on the screen are the same deadlines for school districts. So these are the same deadlines that a school district, traditional public school, would be submitting something to the county office. So these aren't different timelines or reports, just so you know. I'll reinforce again, I do think oversight is about a team approach, working together, communication, no surprises, no secrets. It's a really important thing. This is about protecting the charter school as well as the oversight agency. So it's really important to be on the same page on that. Again, we've got to do site visits, there's different checklists that you can have, but don't have the secret rule. Make sure everybody is aware of what we're going to expect as an oversight agency, so the charter can be prepared for that. What we don't want to do is make a lot of extra work for the charter. We want the charter to make sure that they're fulfilling their educational mission, but they shouldn't be having to generate paperwork just to make the oversight agency happy. And I would always say that oversight, being proactive, is the best thing. That's to help the charter school be successful, and really in the end for students to be successful. In the end, that's what we want. We want all the students in our school district to be successful. There are provisions in the law where the oversight agency can be reimbursed, or it will be reimbursed, or will receive money from the charter school for oversight, and that's in law. It's a 1%, 3% rule, and it depends on, it's 1% unless if the school district or the authorizer is providing substantially rent-free facilities to the charter school, then it can be a 3% oversight fee. The oversight fee can never be more than what oversight is really costing. So that's important. So if by law 1% is what the charter school needs to pay for oversight, but the authorizer isn't really spending that dollar amount in oversight, which is pretty hard to do because 1% isn't much, they couldn't collect the whole 1%. I'm going to tell you, if an authorizer is providing good oversight, of financial records, payroll, attendance, all the things they should be providing oversight, curriculum, doing site visits, doing all the things they're supposed to do, 1% is nothing. You're gonna spend much more than you're actually gonna receive from the charter school for oversight. It was never meant to be a dollar for dollar thing. We, as an authorizer, once we have the charter school as part of our curriculum offerings, part of our district, we do need to provide good oversight, whether or not we are reimbursed 100% or not. And I'm gonna tell you, no, it's not a mandated cost or something the state's gonna reimburse you extra for, but you wanna make sure your charter school is solvent and doing the right thing, because you wanna make sure you're protecting the students of the district. So just because you're not receiving enough to reimburse you for good oversight, that's not a reason not to do it. I've seen too many authorizers get in trouble for that. So when I say MOU, I mean Memorandum of Understanding, and basically it is a supplement to the petition. It is an additional contract, just like the petition is a contract, so is the MOU. So it's a contract of the types of services and the things that we're going to expect. It's not required by law, but we think it's really, really important to make sure the relationship stays on the same page and that we understand each other. If an MOU is written vaguely, it doesn't do any good. So we really need to talk about what the provisions mean, and it's a two-way thing. We both need to talk about the provisions and understand the provisions so that we can be on the same page. Again, charter school authorizer relationships start out really bad in some ways anyway, because the district may not want the charter school there. So by not having an MOU and making sure it's clear and so that we can be on the same page, we're not helping ourselves if we don't have that, right? Because we may already not be getting along and now we don't have an MOU, or it's not clear if the relationship is not going to get better, believe me. So, MOUs are a good thing. And it is negotiated. I will tell you that in some counties, much larger counties, not on this side of the state, it's pretty well known that if you don't agree to our MOU, you might as well not come and apply in our district. And so, there are some counties that have, and some districts, larger districts, that have a philosophy about their MOU. They already have their MOU determined, and you charter petitioner, if you want to come forward, this is what you're going to agree to. Most places it is a negotiation back and forth. But remember, if the district does, or the authorizer, potential authorizer, assume it's a district, does have a board policy saying, this is our draft MOU, and any petitioner that comes forward, we do expect for these basics to be in the MOU, that may be in board policy of the district. That may be something that we've already thought ahead in our planning, and that any petition that comes forward, we would want certain things in place. So you will see that many districts do talk about MOUs even before that petition comes forward. You may not know the size of the charter or the focus of the charter, but there are certain things that you know you're going to want in place. So that's something as a pre-authorizer that you can talk about. This section is much more negative because it's about if a petition isn't approved, if we don't renew a petition, or if we revoke. So the rules on that are here. Basically, as I talked about, the grounds for denial for a petition is if all the elements, 15 plus elements aren't there, if it's not a sound educational program, if we don't believe that the petitioners will be successful. And so that sounds kind of vague, but that's why you have to have a process to actually look at the petition if you're going to determine that. Nobody wants a group of people to come forward with an idea that isn't going to be successful. So there'd have to be something factual behind that. So again, the affirmations, the signatures, those are all reasons that we might deny the petition. If it is denied, as we kind of talked about earlier, it will go to the county office. So the district denies the petition, it goes to the county office. There is also a timeline there that the county office would need to look at the denied petition. It's 180 days, yeah, it's 180 calendar days, so it would go there, and then the county office would make the decision. If it's approved there, now it's a county office charter, but you will see that the district that denied the petition initially still has a Prop 39 facility requirement, so it doesn't get rid of the Prop 39 facility requirement. If the county office were to deny the petition as well, then it goes to the State Board of Education for approval. So that's the process of what happens.
I just wanted to throw in
Yes.
to make sure everybody understands, it's not an automatic that if a district denies, it automatically goes to the county. The charter has to decide that they want to appeal the charter to the county. And if the county denies it, they have to decide they want to appeal that decision to the State Board of Education. So it's not an automatic from one to the next. They have to make that affirmative decision to do that.
And some charters decide not to.
Yeah,
They're
there's-
denied by an authorizer and they decide, you know what, they're right. Our petition doesn't include certain elements. We're gonna go back and try again. We're gonna rework that petition because if denied, thank you. It continues to go forward in the way that it was written as the initial petition. It's not like if the district denies the petition, it can be rewritten and brought to the county. It's the same petition that's brought forward. So yeah, it's very true that the group that brought the petition forward that was denied makes the conscious decision that they want to appeal that and go to the county. And then they would make a conscious decision if it's denied there to appeal that and go to the State Board of Education. It's not, it doesn't just happen, it's a conscious decision and it's a lot of work. It's really a lot of work. So if a group brings a petition forward directly to a county office, there's also an appeal process there. So if the county office denies the petition, then it would go to the State Board of Education if the petitioners decide they want to appeal that. So there is a method there as well. Renewals of petition, again, would be for a 5-year period. And basically, when a renewal petition is brought forward, it's the very same process as a new petition, except you don't have to get new signatures, right? The signatures were brought with the initial petition, but all the elements, affirmations, all of that has to be there. Plus, the petitioners have to show that the educational program has been sound, right? That they have followed the petition. So for renewal, that's really important. It's all the original pieces we talked about, except the signatures. In addition to that the educational program has been sound and financially they are able to move ahead. Revocation is a process that we're not going to go into all the details, but it's when the charter has been bad. And so when you hear that a charter has been revoked or that the authorizer has brought forward an action to be revoked, it's because something really bad has happened in the authorizer's view. And so then it's played out, but usually it's fraud or mismanagement or finances, it's something, or they're not following the charter in a very material way, there have been notices to cure, it hasn't been fixed, it doesn't just happen overnight. I mean, something has happened, it's much more serious obviously than a charter petition not being renewed. So, you ready?
So as Michelle mentioned earlier, charter schools are public schools and they are funded the same way that your traditional school districts are funded. So all school districts now are funded under the local control funding formula. How many of you know details about what we call LCFF and the LCAP? So some. So I'll go through that piece of it quickly. LCFF funds school districts based on grants, and there's actually 3 grants. There's a base grant, so that's a per average daily attendance amount that all school districts get per student. And again, it's called per ADA because it's not just because all of you have signed up for school doesn't mean that all of you are going to show up to school every day. So it really is a formula about the students that are actually attending school. And so all schools and charter schools are receiving this base grant amount based on different grade spans. On top of that, there's what they call a supplemental grant. So you get another 20% on top of that for every student that is either an English learner, a foster youth, or is eligible for free and reduced price meals. And they call them unduplicated pupils because, as you can imagine, a lot of those students are probably all 3 or more than one of them, and you can't count them 3 times. So for each percentage of student that you have of that, you get an extra 20% grant. And then on top of that, there's a concentration grant. So if you have more than 55% of your students that meet that threshold that are the unduplicated pupils, then you get another 50% grant on top of that. The base grant is the same amount that everybody is getting, and those are basically your general dollars that you can use for anything and everything across your school district. Those are what are really fueling and paying for district staff, for teachers, and for all the different types of services, the people who are processing payroll, etc., throughout your district. The supplemental and concentration grant dollars that are on top, those are supposed to be used to serve those students that generated those dollars. So they should be used for those unduplicated pupils that actually brought those monies into the district. And you have to be able to show that you're using those dollars in order to provide improved or increased services for those students. So all of that, in general, is the same for your traditional school districts and for charter schools. The difference that you start, where you start seeing some of this difference, for example, is the concentration grant. Charter schools are limited in how much of a concentration grant they can receive. So that amount, as I mentioned, is based on this unduplicated pupil percentage, and charter schools are capped at whatever district they are located in. So if a charter school had 80% unduplicated pupils, but the school district that they're located in only has 50%, they're capped at that 50%. And so that's the one difference there between charter schools and school districts. The supplemental concentration grant funding, again, charter schools like school districts have to show that they are using those dollars to improve or increase services for those pupils that are generating those dollars, and they have to provide proof of that in their local control and accountability plan, which is the document that's now being used by all public schools in order to show how they are providing services to their students, where those dollars are going that they're receiving from the state, and hopefully how they're working to close that achievement gap for their students moving forward. So charter schools, again, have to show that same work that school districts have to, but charter schools have the ability, charter schools have the ability to use those dollars on a charter-wide basis, like school districts can use them on a district-wide basis, but their requirement isn't triggered by a certain percentage of students. So it's technical to get into, but just know that there is a slight difference that allows a charter school to use theirs charter-wide, though they still have to show in their local control and accountability plan how they're using those dollars, how it's improving and increased services for students, and how those monies are principally directed towards those students that generated those dollars. The next two slides give you a summary of the differences and the similarities between charter schools and regular school districts and county offices of education when it comes to the local control and accountability plan. There are 8 state priority areas that were written into the law for the local control funding formula, and charter schools have to provide information on those as well, but only on those that are pertinent to the students that they are serving. So as you can imagine, there are requirements in there for graduation. If a charter school is only a K through 3, they're not going to be graduating students, so they don't have to address that one state priority, for example. So it gives them that little bit of leeway. School districts and county offices are required to consult a certain various groups as they're preparing the local control and accountability plan. And charter schools, the only difference really is the bargaining units. A lot of charter schools do not have bargaining units. They're not union shops, and so they aren't required to consult those bargaining units if in that respect. Obviously, we always argue that charter schools, even though as I go through these, aren't required to do some of these things, it's important that they emulate those laws, that they try to do those same things that school districts are doing, because at the end of the day, the whole point in this local control and accountability plan is to provide transparency. And so your stakeholders, your parents, etc., know what you as a school are providing. And just because you're a charter school doesn't mean you should be providing that transparency to your stakeholders as well. Review and comment, same thing. School districts are required to provide their LCAP to their parent advisory committee meetings or parent advisory committees, and to their English learner parent advisory committees, etc. Charter schools do not have that requirement to do that like school districts and county offices do. And there's the local control and accountability plan template that have to be filled out by all public schools, including charter schools. But charter schools have the ability to align their LCAP, which is typically a 3-year plan, they can align it to their budget. And most charter schools, with the exception of that initial petition that Michelle talked about, are submitting an annual budget to their authorizer. They're not doing 3 years, which is the current year plus the 3 upcoming years. And so they're allowed to adjust their LCAP to meet that 1 year time frame that goes along with their budget. Use of supplemental concentration grant dollars, I mentioned that as well. They have the ability to use theirs charter-wide without meeting a specific threshold. They still have to provide the reasons and how they're using those dollars and how it's helping the students. But how they use those dollars, they have a little more flexibility as far as the threshold that has to be met in order to do that. Adoption, school districts are required to hold a public hearing and then adopt their LCAP at a public meeting at the same time that they're adopting their budget. Charter schools do not have that requirement. Again, we recommend that charter schools also do this to make it transparent and available to their stakeholders, but that requirement isn't there. LCAPs by school districts and county offices have to be posted on the website of the school district, and the county office has to post all of the LCAPs of their school district's charters on their website, their school district schools. Charter schools do not have that posting requirement, but again, we encourage charter schools to do so. We encourage authorizers to post the LCAPs of their charters on their website, and we encourage the counties, when they're posting all of the LCAPs for their school districts, to also post the LCAPs for their charter schools as well, so that that information is there readily available for the community and the stakeholders. Lastly, the one that you hear probably the most about is approvals. School districts have to submit their LCAPs to the county. The county actually goes through, reviews them, and approves them, provides comments and feedback, etc. County offices have to submit their LCAPs to the state, and the state reviews them, approves them, provides feedback. Charter schools are not required, while charter schools have to submit their LCAPs to their school district authorizers and to the county, neither of them have approval rights for those. So a school district who has a charter school that they're authorizing while they're going to receive that LCAP, they do not have the legal requirement to review and approve that charter and tell the charter you have to make changes or it's great and you can move forward. However, as Michelle mentioned, as an authorizer, and you saw it before on one of the slides, you, as an authorizer, a school district or county office has oversight responsibilities. So it's important that they do review those LCAPs, even though they can't stamp approve and disapproved on it, that they review those LCAPs, that they provide feedback, that they ensure that there's not something in that LCAP that's different from what the charter said that requires a material revision to their charter. You need to be looking at that document to make sure that they're making the progress and doing what is going to be happening or what they should be doing for their students, even if you can't stamp approve or disapprove when you're giving those back. So the school districts receive money from basically 3 sources. There are monies from the federal government that are coming in for various programs. There's the money that's coming in from the state, and then there's local property taxes. Charter schools are eligible for those same 3 pots of money. The only difference is that those local property tax dollars are coming from their authorizer from that school district, typically, to the charter school. And those are called in lieu of property tax payments. And so in 9 times out of 10 cases, the school district that either approved the charter or that denied the charter is making that in lieu of property tax payment. So if you have a charter school that you're either authorizing as a school district or that you denied and went to the county on appeal, you're still on the hook basically for making that in lieu of property tax payment. Again, with the idea being that those property taxes that are within your community are being provided to all of those public school students, whether they're in district schools or in charter schools. And so this chart just lets you know who it is that's responsible for making those transfers. And again, in 3 out of 4 cases, it's the school district that either approved the charter or denied that petition that's making that in lieu of property tax payment. The only time that there's a difference in that is a charter school that went directly to the county office. And then it's wherever the students are coming from, each one of those districts would be responsible for making that in lieu of property tax payment. But those local property taxes make up a piece of the charter's revenues, and then the rest will come from the state and any federal programs that they're eligible for. So these couple of slides talk about how that in lieu of property tax payment works. And I'm gonna fast forward through these because every time I read the words, I get twisted, and so I ended up making a nice little handy chart for it, because it was much easier to follow. So if you look at this, and this is showing a basic aid school district. So how many of you know what a basic aid school district is? Most of you do, since you're in one. But basic aid school districts are basically, you're funded from your property taxes. You're not receiving dollars from the state because your property taxes are above what you would be getting from the state under the local control funding formula. If you as a basic aid school district authorized a charter school, and you have students that are attending that charter school from within your district, you are making that in lieu of property tax payments for those students. And that's that. If they have students that are attending this charter school that are coming from another school district that are funded, that would have been funded by the state in that other school district, you are still making that in lieu of property tax payment, but the state is gonna backfill 70% of that. So for students that are attending the charter school from outside these boundaries that are coming from a district that would have been funded from the state backfills you some of those dollars. And in case it wasn't clear, charter schools, as we mentioned, are public schools. They, unlike school districts, don't have boundaries, so they can accept students from anywhere, up to the limit that they have on how many students that they're educating. So if they're educating 500 students and they get 500 applicants, it doesn't matter where they're coming from within the state of California, they can educate those 500 students. And so how the funding works for them is with those property tax transfers, a piece of it, but you as a basic aid district, if they're your students, you're basically paying out those dollars as you would have paid if they were within your school district. But if they're coming from an outside district that was a state aid district, then you would receive those dollars or 70% of those dollars back to help backfill. And that was something that the state put into law because there was some difficulty with basic aid districts who were losing some of their revenues to students that they wouldn't have been responsible for educating otherwise. There is some language in the law that says that if a student that is your student from the basic aid district and goes to a charter school in a state aid district, that you have to pay that full amount for those students. It's something that's written in law. We've talked to CEE, and CEE says nobody ever enforces it, nobody's looking at it, but I always mention it because one day they could change their minds. And so it's something that I think everybody needs to be aware of. But you have that information there. So charter schools facilities, this is probably the one area that you hear most about in the news when you're thinking and hear about charter schools. You usually hear about petitions, whether or not they get approved and denied, and then where a charter school is located. So as Michelle mentioned earlier, there are very specific rules in the education code as to where a charter school can locate. And the big global picture is that a charter school should be located within the boundaries of the district or county that authorized them. They should, if they're located within X school district and they were authorized by X school district, that's where they should have their physical facilities. There are some exceptions, but they are very limited. They require that a charter school meet certain requirements in order to actually be able to locate a facility their main facility outside of it. There is law that allows a charter school to locate a resource center in an adjacent county than where it's been authorized. And the idea being that there might be kids that are, again, because they can come from all over the state, that are in an adjacent location that need to be able to get services, etc., and aren't able, for whatever reason, to come all the way to the charter school's main location, and that can happen at this type of resource center. What you might have seen in the news over the last several years and was in the court was a case of Anderson versus Shasta. There were a lot of school districts throughout California. It just so happens that Anderson Union High School decided to file a lawsuit regarding it. There were charter schools that were being authorized by one school district and locating their facilities in adjacent school districts. So they weren't located within that district, and unlike that exception that allows them to locate a resource center in an adjacent county, they were actually still locating within the same county, just in separate school districts. And so you had districts that were getting calls from parents asking about this charter school, and the school district was like, I don't know what you're talking about, that's not one of our charter schools, we don't know who this is. And you had other school districts that were actually authorizing charter schools by the multitude, and they were being located everywhere but their school district. So Anderson Union High School District actually filed suit. It went to court, it was appealed at the appellate level, and the school district prevailed. The charter school actually tried to appeal to the state Supreme Court, and the same state Supreme Court decided not to hear it, which meant that the appellate court's decision stood. And what they basically said was no, no, no charters. The law very clearly states you're supposed to be locating within the boundaries of your authorizer, or you can locate a resource center in an adjacent county, but you can't get authorized by one district and start to plop different locations in other school districts in adjacent areas. And so there are, over 100,000 students throughout California in these resource centers located outside of their district boundaries where they were authorized. And so the State Board of Education gave them a 1-year extension. They had until June 30th, this past June 30, to actually either close those centers down or go to those individual school districts and ask and submit charter petitions to be authorized by those separate school districts. And so you have charters all over California that have done one or the other, and some of them that are, from what I've heard, are still scrambling to figure out what they're going to do now that school's starting and what they're going to do with those kids. But it became very clear that you had to be within those boundaries unless you met one of those very limited exceptions that are written within the education code. So charter schools really have two big picture umbrella options when it comes to facilities. They can either acquire or lease their own facilities, so they could go out, buy a building, complete improvements, move into it. They can buy a piece of land, construct their own brand new facility. They can lease or rent. You see a lot of charter schools from strip malls to churches to various different places. So they can do that on their own, and a lot of them do that. But the majority of them really are coming to their local school districts to access facilities. And there's various ways that they can do that. Proposition 39 being the main one, and the one that you hear about most in the news, and that you get the most contention with. I worked for who I like to call the 800-pound gorilla. I worked for LAUSD for 8.5 years. And so you hear about LAUSD and their Proposition 39 issues every year and the fights that are going on, etc. And that really goes back to, as Michelle was talking about, you need communication, you need a process that's transparent and open and that everybody understands. Because at the end of the day, those kinds of fights between the adults are hurting the kids. And so that really is something that needs to be figured out that way. Proposition 39 required that public schools, that traditional school districts provide charter schools with facilities. The idea being that the facilities are public facilities and they should be shared fairly amongst all public school students, including charter school students. And so it requires school districts to provide reasonably equivalent, contiguous, furnished, and equipped space to charter schools based on the charter school's in-district average daily attendance. So a charter school, as I said before, can have kids that are coming from all over the place. But if they're within your school district and they have 80 of your kids and 20 from school district ABC down the street, you technically only have to provide space for the kids that they are educating that are your students. However, again, in the spirit of cooperation, we always urge that if you have the space available, that you make that space available to the charter schools for all of their students, so they're not having to split up their educational programs. But technically, it's not required by law. You're only required to accommodate those in-district students. And also only those that are classroom-based. So if it's an independent study program or a virtual online program, your school district is not required to provide facilities. It's also important to note that you're providing those facilities to the charter schools that are educating those students whether or not it's your charter school, whether or not you are the authorizer of that charter school. So a school district that hasn't authorized any charters, for example, but has a charter school that is educating at least 80 of its students, if that charter school submits a valid request for that space, the school district is required to provide that space for that charter school. And that's something to keep in mind with Proposition 39, that I think a lot of people see school districts providing space to charter schools and go, well, we don't have enough room, why are our kids getting shuffled around? For the charter school students, they are required to by law. It is not a choice. They do not have the ability to say, nope, I don't have any classrooms, so you're gonna have to go find space elsewhere. They are required to provide space to those charter school students under Proposition 39. So the Proposition 39 process is a long and drawn out process. It starts in November and does not finish until May. And there's a deadline every month. It's a little ping pong back and forth between the charter school and the school district. So by November 1st, the charter school has to submit a Proposition 39 request saying, we would like facilities. This is the number of students that we're educating that are in district and just total students. This is the area we would like to be located in. Sometimes a charter school will tell you, but we want to be on this school campus. They are required to provide just a packet of information that the school district then receives, reviews. By December 1st, the school district is basically going to respond to that request as it pertains to the projected average daily attendance. So the charter school can say, I'm educating 150 of your students. Here's proof that I'm educating 150 of your students. The school, and so I need 10 classrooms. The school district looks at that information and goes, yeah, I don't agree. I think 30 of these aren't our kids, or 30 of these aren't eligible for whatever reason that is, and we think we only need to provide space for 120 students. So that the school district actually provides that feedback on December 1st and provides a reason why they believe there is a change in that. By January 2nd, the charter school responds to that request from the school district and goes, okay, I agree, it really is only 120. Or no, it's 150 and this is really the reason why. February 1st, the school district provides what they call a preliminary offer. So based on that back and forth, the number of students, based on the school district looking at their facilities and what they can make available, they tell the charter school or charter schools, okay, this is the space that we believe we can provide to you. Here's the number of classrooms that'll fit X number of students. Here's where it's located. Here's the shared facilities if you're going to be on a campus with another school district, so you'll be sharing the cafeteria, 3 hours a day, and the science rooms or whatever all of those are. They have to lay all of that out, plus discuss what the fee might be, potential fee for those. And actually, I don't think it's in one of the slides now that I think about it, but school districts are allowed to charge what they call a pro rata share. And so this is school districts take what it costs them to maintain the facilities that they're paying for out of their general fund. They divide that by the total square footage of the school district, and they get a per square foot amount. And then they can take that amount and multiply that times the square footage that the charter is going to be occupying, and that's what they can charge the charter school for those facilities. So they can't say, I'm charging you $10 million just because I want to, or make up a number or say, hey, market rate is $3 a square foot. They can only charge that pro rata share for those spaces. So come March 1st, the following month, the charter school basically responds to that offer from the school district. They go, okay, I'm great, I think this is the best thing, I'm moving on, or no, I need another classroom for this reason, or I really do need classrooms for another 20 students, or whatever feedback they may have. And then on April 1st, the district actually responds with the final offer. Taking all of that back and forth into consideration, the district then goes and says, okay, this is what we're prepared to offer you for facilities for this coming fiscal year. And on May 1st, the charter school then comes back and says, okay, we accept that offer, and we'll take those facilities starting at the beginning of the school year, or no, we're not going to accept that offer for X, Y, and Z reasons. We either found something else, etc. This is a lot of the places where you start seeing some things in the news, where you start seeing lawsuits that get filed with charter schools that don't feel that the district is providing facilities fairly or per law, and you get a little bit of back and forth going through that. The space then has to be made available to the charter school at least 10 days before school starts. Just like school districts let their teachers in to get to their classrooms, prepare them, etc., the charter school has to have the ability to do that as well. And so as you see, this Proposition 39 process is a bit long and arduous, and it's very detailed, unlike a lot of the other law that's written. And there are some parts of Proposition 39 that are contentious. How you determine the number of spaces, if it's comparable to what school districts or how they're loading their classrooms. There have been a lot of lawsuits going back and forth between all of that over the years. But this is one area where they do have at least a little more detail than in some of the other charter law that's written in the education code right now. There are alternatives to Proposition 39 when it comes to looking at district facilities and what the district can offer. For most school districts across California, the real estate that it owns really is its largest asset. You may be paying the most out to teachers and staff, etc., larger part of your budget. But when it comes to the value of what's in the district, as far as just straight dollars, it really is the real estate for a lot of them. And so it's important that school districts know and have a really good strategic idea of what's happening with their facilities, what they need and don't need for their purposes, so they can start making decisions about whether or not they have property that could be made available for other uses, and one of those uses being charter schools potentially. There are 3 big picture alternatives, I think, that are available to make space available to charter schools outside of Proposition 39. The first one is this idea of surplus property, that there is property that a district might have that they aren't using for their district needs. Whether it's a vacant site, one that got closed, one that's underutilized, whatever that might be. This might be property that could be leased or even sold to a charter school in exchange for, okay, Prop 39 is off the table, here's a piece of property or here's a school building that you can utilize in order to provide education to your students. And so this is not something that districts always think about, but it's something that I like to put out there and make sure that it's something that is considered when you're looking at that. Especially if you're dealing with contentious Proposition 39 co-locations where charter schools are sharing space with school districts. This is something that potentially could be looked at. The same thing with underutilized properties or properties that could be redeveloped. Again, I work for LAUSD. We had some school sites out in the valley that had been vacant for 20 years. The school district didn't see that enrollment was going to be picking up in those areas. We had charter schools that actually had money, some from the state, some from private donors that actually had money to build facilities. They just, as you can imagine, finding acres and acres of land in Los Angeles to build a new school is hard to come by. And so we actually made those properties available to charter schools through a request for proposal process, that we would lease that property to them for the next 40, 50, 60 years if they would come in, redevelop them, and use them for their facilities. It's a win-win. We didn't have to worry about Proposition 39 and co-locating them. We had a property that was derelict, that we had to worry about mowing weeds all the time and people breaking into. And now that's an operational expense that as the school district, it didn't have any longer because a charter school was going to be able to use those facilities. And so trying to find those areas where there's the potential for the win-win is something that I think is important to look at. Other alternatives, there's the zoning exemption. School districts can exempt themselves from zoning requirements when they're building facilities. We had charter schools that had the money, found a piece of land that they could build on, but technically you weren't allowed to build a school there. A school district can't provide a charter school with a zoning exemption within certain requirements that are in law, so that the charter school could go ahead and build those facilities. And again, that way the charter school wasn't coming to you for Proposition 39 space, and you had a win-win situation. Some school districts, charter schools have their own facilities. They need monies to provide fixtures, equipment, other things. You could enter into an agreement to provide those funds or that equipment for them. Some have actually provided funds to lease outside space just because they didn't have space that they could make available based on their programs within their district. There's nothing in the code that restricts a school district and a charter school from coming to some mutually agreed upon agreement outside of Proposition 39 to make sure that that charter school has facilities available to it if they're coming knocking on your door. I think the big picture that I always argue, or that I always talk to school districts about, as Michelle also mentioned on the oversight side, make sure you have policies and procedures in place so that you're providing a transparent process and it's fair, especially if you have more than one charter school, so that everybody's getting the same shake. So it's not that because you came in the door and asked me and we're friends, I'd give that deal to you, but I'm not going to give it to the next charter school that walks in the door because I don't know them. If you have a charter school that approaches you with an idea about a piece of land, anything like that, I would recommend that you look at putting together a request for proposal and making that possibility available to all charter schools, and not simply, again, to one or the other, so that there's not that appearance of playing favorites, and so that opportunity is available to all. I guess I could just yell louder. It's the last slide anyway. And so we just always encourage you, if you're going to be putting a program in place for a charter school, don't just do it for that one. Make sure it's something that's available to all, that it's a fair process, a transparent process, and something that they'll all know about from the beginning, so that you don't have those issues of it's just politics or it's favorites or any of that. And so with that, we thank you very much for listening to Michelle and I for an hour and a half. Be sure if you have any questions to fill out the little white cards and give them to the county office, and we will do everything we can to answer them so that they can post them and everybody has that same information. So thank you.